I walked into the kitchen that morning, expecting the usual routine. My mom making coffee, my dad scrolling through his phone at the table. But instead, everything felt different, as though the air had shifted without warning. My mom was standing by the counter, holding an envelope in her hands like it was some kind of lifeline, and she looked up at me with a strange expression on her face, one I couldn't quite place. "Mom," I asked, voice steady, but already bracing for whatever was coming. She didn't respond right away, just handed me the envelope. It was a plain, official-looking letter, the kind that immediately made your pulse quicken, like you were about to be informed of some terrible, life-altering news. "Read it," she muttered, almost under her breath, like the words were too heavy for her to say out loud. I tore open the envelope, and, as I skimmed over the contents, I felt the blood drain from my face. "Effective next month, your rent will increase by 50%. This is necessary due to financial adjustments." I stood there, frozen, staring at the words. I couldn't believe it. Rent increase? What was she talking about? I paid my rent every month without fail, kept to myself, worked 2 jobs. Hell, I even kept the place tidy, made sure the bills were all handled. So why was my rent suddenly being jacked up? "Mom," I finally said, my voice coming out shakier than I intended. "What is this?" She didn't answer immediately, just turned away, busying herself with some random task like she was trying to pretend that nothing had changed. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands shook as she picked up a mug and then put it down again. It's for Emma," she said, barely above a whisper. "Your sister." I blinked. Emma. My sister, the 20-year-old who, until recently, had been living at home with my parents. She didn't pay rent. She didn't work. Hell, she barely left her room, only ever emerging to eat or complain about how hard life was for her. But now, it seemed like everything was about her. "Emma," I repeated, disbelief creeping into my voice. "How does this have anything to do with her?" My mom shifted uncomfortably. She's been having some issues. Financial issues. With school, with her friends, with everything. We're just trying to help her out. "Help her out," I repeated, incredulous. "She hasn't contributed a single penny to this house since she got her own car last year, and now I'm getting punished for it?" At that moment, my sister Emma walked into the kitchen, her usual dramatic flair accompanying her every step. She had this way of moving, like she was the star of some reality show, and the world existed just to cater to her whims. She glanced at me and then at the letter in my hands. "Everything okay in here?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet, though I could sense the undercurrent of something more in her tone. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Mom's raising my rent to cover your what? Shopping trips? Spa days? Your lifestyle?" She gave a little shrug, like I was overreacting, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her phone screen. "Well, yeah. I'm not exactly rolling in the cash, and my expenses have just gone up a lot lately. New phone, new clothes, a few trips with my friends. And, I don't want to be a burden on you guys, but I do need some help. So you just take it from me?" I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I'm supposed to pay the price for your expenses? What about me, Emma? What about my life? My bills?" She barely even looked at me when she replied. "Don't take it so personally. Mom and Dad are just trying to help me, and I'm sure they'll come through for you too." She said it like it was just a casual conversation, as if we were discussing what toppings to put on pizza, not my future being decided without my consent. "Enough," I said, my voice rising now, my patience fraying faster than I'd ever experienced. "This is not okay, Emma. This is not how family works." My mom, who had been silent through most of the exchange, finally spoke up. "You don't understand, honey. Emma has problems. She's struggling, and we're just doing what we can to help her. The rent increase, it's temporary. You'll be fine. You've always managed." My heart dropped. It was like I wasn't even there. Like I was just a convenience for them when they needed help with their precious little girl. "Temporary?" I echoed, disbelief and anger bubbling up inside me. "Temporary until when? Until Emma decides she needs more? Or until I don't have enough money to live here anymore?" Emma just rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic." I didn't know whether to scream or cry. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. But there was my mom, standing in front of me, justifying it all like it was the most normal thing in the world. I felt something snap inside me, something I couldn't put into words yet. All these years, I'd been the good one, the responsible one, the one who always did what was asked of her. And now I was being punished for it. I was being asked to foot the bill for my sister's laziness and entitlement. And in that moment, I realized something that shook me to my core. I was no longer the person they came to for support. I was just another casualty in their never-ending quest to cater to Emma's whims. But I wasn't going to let this slide. I couldn't. I left the kitchen without saying another word, the envelope still clutched tightly in my hand, the weight of it pressing down on my chest. I had no idea how I was going to deal with this, but one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The days after that conversation were a blur, a strange combination of dread and anger that I couldn't shake off. I kept trying to talk myself into accepting what had happened, trying to convince myself that it wasn't as big of a deal as it felt, but it was hard to ignore the nagging feeling in my stomach every time I thought about it. Every day, I came home to the same reality. My rent was going up, and nothing was being done to address the root cause of the problem. Emma's incessant demand for more, her ability to drain everything around her without so much as a thank you. I couldn't even look at her the same way anymore. She'd always been selfish, but now it was clear that she didn't care about anyone else, and that hurt more than I cared to admit. It wasn't just the rent increase that was weighing on me. It was the fact that I'd spent years working so hard, never asking for anything in return, trying to be the responsible one, and now I was being forced into this position where I had to question everything about my family. I thought of all the times I'd given up my own wants and needs to keep the peace to avoid conflict. And now, in the blink of an eye, I was being punished for it. I walked around the house, feeling like a stranger in my own skin, like everything I'd ever believed about what family was supposed to be had been turned upside down. One night, a few days later, I came home late from work, my feet aching, my head heavy with exhaustion. I was just looking for some quiet, some peace, but as soon as I walked in the door, I could feel the tension in the air. The house was quiet, too quiet, like everyone was holding their breath. I walked into the living room, where my parents were sitting on the couch, a strange silence between them. Emma's room was closed off, and I couldn't hear her, which only made me more uneasy. "Hey," I said, trying to break the silence. "What's going on?" My mom turned toward me, her eyes avoiding mine. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low, almost apologetic. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "About what?" My dad sighed heavily, as if he'd been carrying a weight for far too long. "Your mom and I have been talking," he began, rubbing his hands together nervously. "And, we know this rent increase has been hard on you. It's not fair. We should have communicated better." I felt my heart race. This was the moment where they were finally going to admit they'd made a mistake, where they were going to fix things, apologize for how they'd treated me. But then my mom spoke, and everything in me froze. "It's just that Emma has a lot of needs," she said, almost as if she were trying to justify it. "She's been struggling, and we're doing what we can to support her. She needs help with her tuition, her lifestyle, and, well, we didn't know who else to turn to." I stood there, my body rigid with disbelief. "So what? You're just going to keep throwing me under the bus for her? How long does this go on? How long am I supposed to be the one picking up the slack for her?" I didn't care anymore. The anger I had been holding back for days was finally spilling out, and I couldn't stop it. My mom tried to speak, but I cut her off. "This isn't support, Mom. This is enabling her. You're letting her walk all over you, and you're dragging me into it. I've been paying my rent, keeping up with my responsibilities, and now, because she needs help, I'm the one who's paying for it? I'm not going to just sit here and let you destroy my life for her." My dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing. His silence was like a slap in the face. It was always my mom who did the talking, but this time, it was clear he was complicit in all of it. He wasn't standing up for me. He wasn't even speaking up for himself. He was just going along with whatever Emma wanted. "You don't understand," my mom said, her voice quivering. "We don't want you to leave. We don't want things to be this way. But Emma's threatening us. She's threatening to." "Threatening," I repeated, my voice louder than I intended. "What do you mean, threatening? What is she?" My mom quickly put a hand up, cutting me off. She's been using her debts against us, pushing us into corners. She paused, almost as if she were scared to say the words out loud. She's been blackmailing us. My world tilted, and for a moment, I wasn't sure I heard her right. Blackmailing you? I asked, disbelieving. Yes, my mom whispered, looking down. She has a bunch of credit cards, loans, all in our names. And if we don't cover them, she'll tell people things. Things about your father's job, about me, things we can't afford to let get out. She's been holding this over us for months. I stood there, feeling like I was going to collapse. Everything I thought I knew about my sister was wrong. She wasn't just spoiled. She wasn't just lazy. She was a manipulator, someone who had no problem destroying the people who loved her to get what she wanted. And I had been so blinded by my own anger that I hadn't even seen it. But now it was all coming together. I felt nauseous. I wanted to yell, to scream, to make them understand how wrong they were. But I couldn't. All I could do was stand there, staring at them, my mind racing, my heart pounding. The one person I had trusted the most, the one person I thought would have my back no matter what, was the one who had been orchestrating all of this behind closed doors. Emma had trapped them, and now she had me caught at her web too. So that's it, I said, the words coming out in a low, bitter laugh. You're just going to keep letting her destroy everything for you? For me, my mom burst into tears, her face crumpling as the weight of the truth settled on her shoulders. We didn't know what to do. We're scared of her. She has us wrapped around her finger. The words felt like a slap to my face. I couldn't believe it. I had spent years trying to be the responsible one, the good one, while Emma got everything handed to her, and now I was the one paying for it. It wasn't just the rent increase, it was everything. My life, my future was suddenly in jeopardy because my sister had manipulated my parents into making choices that affected all of us. I need to get out of here, I said, my voice cracking with emotion. I turned and walked out of the room, my mind spinning, the weight of everything I had just learned crushing me from all sides. I needed space to think, space to process. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was no easy way out. Emma had won. She had them all under her control, and now she had me too. The next few days were the longest I'd ever experienced. I was in a constant state of limbo, caught between disbelief and anger, unable to focus on anything. Work became a blur. I was showing up, going through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere, on my sister, on my parents, and on everything they had done to me. Every time I walked through the door of my apartment, I was reminded of what I was losing, of what had been taken from me without so much as a second thought. My rent increase was no longer the biggest issue. It was my sister, my family, and the way everything had been turned upside down without any warning. I didn't know how to fix this, or even if it could be fixed. Then, one night, as I sat on the couch, trying to ignore the gnawing frustration in my chest, my phone buzzed. It was a message from someone I hadn't expected to hear from. Tom, my old friend from high school. We had lost touch after I left for college, but somehow he'd managed to find me again. I'd always liked Tom. He was the kind of person who could always make me laugh, and he had a way of seeing the world that was refreshing, even when everything around me felt like it was falling apart. Hey, it's Tom. I know this is out of the blue, but I need to talk to you. Can we meet up? It was strange to hear from him, but at that moment, I didn't care. I needed someone to talk to, someone who didn't have a stake in my family drama, someone who could just listen. I texted him back almost immediately, agreeing to meet at a cafe nearby. I didn't know what to expect when I saw him, but when I walked into the cafe and spotted him sitting by the window, I immediately felt a sense of relief. He looked the same, maybe a little older, but still with that easygoing smile that had always made him stand out in a crowd. He stood up as soon as he saw me and pulled me into a hug. It was a strange feeling, being held by someone who knew me before everything had gotten so complicated, before my world had been turned upside down. "Long time no see," he said, grinning. "I hope you haven't forgotten me already." I couldn't help but laugh, the tension in my chest easing just a little. "It's been way too long. How've you been?" We sat down, and for a moment, I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure where to start. It felt like there was so much to explain, but I wasn't ready to dive into the mess that was my life. But Tom was persistent. "So what's going on? You seem, I don't know, off. Something's on your mind." He didn't press me, but his eyes were kind, and I could see he genuinely wanted to know what had been going on with me. I hesitated, but I couldn't help myself. I needed to get it out. I needed to explain everything to someone who wasn't tied to my family, someone who could see the bigger picture. So I told him everything about my sister, the rent increase, my parents, the way they had been enabling Emma for years. I talked about how it all felt like it was spiraling out of control, how I was being pushed to the edge by something I couldn't even change. As I spoke, Tom's expression shifted. He went from concern to something else, something I couldn't quite place. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his mouth set in a firm line. When I finished, there was a long pause. It felt like he was processing everything I had just dumped on him, and I waited for him to respond. "I think you're missing something," he said finally, his voice calm but insistent. "Missing something? What do you mean?" I asked, confused. Tom leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think your sister might be hiding something. There's more going on with her than you think." I blinked, not quite understanding what he was getting at. "What do you mean?" "She's a spoiled brat who doesn't care about anyone but herself." He shook his head. "No, I don't think it's that simple. Have you ever thought about why she's acting the way she is? Why she's pulling these strings, getting your parents wrapped around her finger? It's like she has this whole operation going on behind the scenes, and no one's really seeing the full picture." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you talking about?" "I've been hearing things," Tom said, his voice lowered, "about your sister. I don't know all the details, but there's something bigger at play here. She's not just spending money on whatever she feels like. She's got connections. People involved in stuff you wouldn't believe." My stomach twisted. "What? What kind of stuff?" He looked around the cafe, making sure no one was listening before he spoke again. "You know she has a lot of friends, right? People who work in finance, in high-end retail, in all sorts of shady businesses. She's been using those connections to get herself out of trouble. You've seen the way she's always got the latest gadgets, the designer clothes, right?" I nodded slowly, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "Well, that's not just her being lucky," Tom continued. "There's a lot of money behind her, and I'm pretty sure it's not all clean. I think she's getting money from people who expect something in return." I felt my head spin. My sister, the one I'd always thought of as a lazy, entitled girl, was involved in something criminal? It didn't make sense. She was smart, sure, but I'd never imagined she was capable of something like this. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Because I think you need to know what you're up against," Tom said quietly. "You think the rent increase is bad? It's nothing compared to what she's pulling behind the scenes. And I think you need to figure out who's really pulling the strings here." I sat there, trying to process everything he'd just told me. It felt like my whole world was shifting beneath my feet. Was I really that blind to my sister? Had I been so focused on my own anger and betrayal that I missed what was really happening? I didn't know what to believe anymore, but one thing was clear. I couldn't just let this go. I needed to find out more about what Emma was really doing. And if I was going to stop it, I had to dig deeper. The truth was out there, and I was going to find it. I spent the next few days trying to piece together what Tom had told me, but every time I thought about it, 1,000 questions raced through my mind. If Emma was really involved in something dangerous, if she was using people to get what she wanted, how could I have been so oblivious to it all? And how deep did this go? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't just keep waiting for things to change. I had to act, to do something before it all spiraled out of control. But the question was, what? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, some key detail that would connect the dots. That night, after dinner, I decided to confront my sister. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had to do it. The way she manipulated everyone around her had to stop, and I was the only one who could make it happen. When I walked into her room, she was sitting at her desk, the glow of her computer screen illuminating her face. She didn't look up when I entered, but I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. I took a deep breath before speaking. "Emma, we need to talk." She glanced up, an eyebrow raised. "About what?" "About everything. About what's been going on with you. About the money. About the way you've been using people for your own gain." Her face changed in an instant, the calm expression slipping into something darker. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms, as if preparing herself for something she knew was coming. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice cold. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to shout. "Don't play dumb. I know what you've been doing. I know you've been using people for money, for favors, for whatever you want. And I know you've been blackmailing Mom and Dad. It's over, Emma." She laughed, but it wasn't the laugh I'd expected. It was empty, sharp, as if she had been waiting for this moment, as if she knew exactly what was going to happen. "You think you can stop me? You think you could just come in here and tell me what to do?" "I'm not trying to tell you what to do, Emma. I'm trying to save you. You're destroying everything, and you don't even see it. You've been pulling strings behind the scenes, using people who care about you, and I'm done letting it happen." She stood up suddenly, the chair scraping against the floor. It felt like the walls were closing in around me as Emma stood there, glaring at me, her expression one of contempt mixed with something else I couldn't place. I had always known that she had a certain way of manipulating people, but this was beyond anything I'd ever imagined. There was no remorse in her eyes, no hint of guilt. She looked like someone who knew exactly what she was doing, and she had no intention of stopping. "You've always been the perfect one," she spat, her voice dripping with bitterness. "You've always followed the rules, played the game, and look where it's gotten you. You're stuck while I get everything I want. I don't have to work for anything because all I have to do is make the right people believe I'm worth it. And they do. They always do." I took a step forward, my chest tight with a mixture of rage and sorrow. I had no idea where all this had come from, but it didn't matter. All the anger, all the frustration I'd been holding back came rushing out. "You don't get it, Emma. You've been ruining people's lives for years. You think that's winning? You think this is what it's all about? You're destroying the one thing you can't get back, your family, your integrity." She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Integrity," she scoffed. "What do you know about integrity? You've always been the one with your nose in the air, thinking you're better than everyone. I'm just more practical. I know how to get what I want, and I'll do whatever it takes to get it. If people get hurt along the way, well, that's their problem, not mine." I could feel the heat of my anger rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. Yelling wouldn't change anything, but maybe I could break through to her. Maybe there was still a part of Emma I could reach, a part of her that wasn't so lost. "Do you really believe that?" I asked, my voice low, almost pleading. "Do you honestly think that getting everything you want means you're winning? What about the people you hurt along the way? What about Mom and Dad? They're terrified of you, Emma. They're terrified of what you're going to do next, and they've been too afraid to stop you." She paused, the anger in her eyes flickering for just a moment, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "They should be afraid. They've let me down too many times. They failed me. All I'm doing is making sure I don't end up like them, pathetic, weak, stuck in a life they don't know how to get out of." I shook my head, my heart breaking for her. "Emma, you don't have to be this way. You don't have to use people, manipulate them just to get what you want. There's a way out. You can change, but not if you keep pushing everyone away. Not if you keep doing this." She didn't say anything at first, but I could see the conflict in her eyes now, the first sign that she was hearing me. It was subtle, but it was there. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure if she was the villain I thought she was. Maybe, just maybe, she was someone who had been hurt too many times to trust anyone anymore. But before I could speak again, there was a knock at the door. My heart sank, and I knew exactly who it was. My parents. I hadn't even realized they were home, but of course they were, probably listening in on every word we were saying, too scared to intervene. I couldn't let them be a part of this anymore. Couldn't let them keep enabling her behavior. This was the moment where everything had to change. I turned to the door, my pulse quickening. "No, don't come in," I called out, but it was too late. The door opened, and my parents stepped into the room, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. They looked like they'd been holding their breath, just waiting for everything to explode. "I think we need to talk," my mom said quietly, her voice shaking. I didn't want to have this conversation. Not now. Not with Emma standing there, ready to fight with everyone in the room. But I didn't have a choice. "You're right," I said, my voice steady despite the anger still simmering beneath the surface. "We do need to talk, but not like this. Not with all of this hanging over our heads." Emma crossed her arms, her eyes narrowed. "What are you going to do? Tell them everything?" You think that's going to change anything? I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Maybe not, but at least I'll know I tried. At least I'll know I didn't sit by and let you destroy everything. And maybe, just maybe, I'll be able to look you in the eye without feeling like I'm being suffocated by your lies. Enough! My father suddenly shouted, his voice loud and commanding, a sharp edge in his tone. It was the first time he'd spoken with any authority in what felt like years. My mother flinched at the sound, and for a moment, it was like time stood still. This was the moment that everything came to a head. I don't want to hear any more of this, my dad continued, his voice now quieter, but still firm. We've let this go on for too long. We've allowed things to go this far, and I've been too afraid to face it. But no more. Emma, you've hurt your mother, and you've hurt your sister, and I'm not going to let it go on any longer. Emma's eyes widened in disbelief, as though she couldn't fathom hearing this from him. She opened her mouth to protest, but my father held up a hand, silencing her. You will not use us anymore, Emma. You will not hold us hostage to your demands. If you want to fix this, you will start by taking responsibility for your actions. No more manipulation. No more threats. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of relief. I wasn't alone in this anymore. My father had finally stepped up, finally taken a stand, and it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. Emma didn't say anything. She just stood there, her arms hanging limply by her sides, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. And in that moment, I realized something. We couldn't fix everything overnight, but we could start over. We could start by telling the truth, by confronting the mess we'd allowed ourselves to live in. I didn't know what the future held for Emma, for my parents, or even for me. But I knew one thing. This was the beginning of something different. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be more battles ahead, but at least now, we had a chance to rebuild what had been broken. And that, for the first time in a long time, felt like enough.